Hello and a very warm welcome to the brand new edition of Policy Watch. I'm Kriti Mishra. Today we'll analyze two imperative topics. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's call for partnership between oil producing and consuming countries and RBI's data localization policy. Let's begin with the first segment. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has made a strong case for partnership between oil producing and consuming countries to reduce energy cost. He met the heads of oil and gas companies recently. PM Modi also expressed concern over high crude prices hurting global economic growth. He enunciated that India holds an important position in the oil and gas market as it is the third largest consumer of oil in the world. And for more on this, I'm joined by Mr. Anil Razdan, former Special Secretary, Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, and also by Mr. M.R. Pasrija, former CMD, Oil India Limited. Welcome to Rajya Sabha Television, both of you. Mr. Razdan, Prime Minister has called for forging a strong partnership between oil-producing and consuming countries. Now, how can this kind of symbiotic relationship foster global growth?
I think it's only natural that it's in the interest of producer that his consumer is healthy. And if the consumer is not healthy and in a position of growth or position to pay the price, then the producer in the long run is not too happy. At the moment, of course, we are expecting the producers to also come and explore some oil in India. The large majors to come and see if we can push up our local production that will ease the pressure of imports, because what is happening is that in the overall trade deficit, whereas last year the petroleum deficit, the oil deficit was contributing about 40%, but this year it could rise to about 50% of the overall trade deficit. So it is a matter of concern, and I think the Prime Minister is very right in having taken up the issue forthright with the oil producers and told them, yes, we need to work together. After all, yes, there are some international developments which have pushed up the sentiment more than the availability. But all eyes are now going to be in November,
yes,
when some sanctions from the US are going to kick in. And the sanctions you see play around with oil purchasing companies, with banks which give guarantees. Our companies are working their way around to see if we can work out either an exemption from the US for some specific needs of our refineries, which have been working on Iranian crude, and also maybe some arrangements if we can work out some arrangement beyond the banking structures or the insurance structures which are dollar linked. So essentially, when it comes to dollar linked economy, that's where we get into trouble. And our woes have also increased because of the falling rupee against the dollar. So the overall impact has been about 70%.
Mr. Pasrija, the Government of India has taken a holistic approach towards the energy sector. Several reforms and initiatives have been unveiled. For instance, there's open acreage licensing policy, early monetization of coal bed methane. There are incentives for small fields discoveries. How important are these steps for boosting investment in this sector?
See, these are good steps taken, but it takes time, by the time these are converted into, physical part, physical output, I'm talking that part, So this is very important, At the same time, these LNG imports can also facilitate, which is for the, city gas distribution, which we talk about, So this is also one area where good potential lies, So this will help indirectly, CNG and city gas distributions, ultimately it is going to be more converted to CNG, which will be for the vehicles, both diesel vehicles as well as, these heavy vehicles as well as cars, So this is one area which is there, And other steps which they have taken also, open acreage licenses, that also is with the view to accelerate the exploration and ultimately increase the production, So this is also a good step taken, but it will take little time. That's the only thing,
Mr. Razdan, you mentioned about payment terms. Now, Prime Minister also pitched for a review of payment terms. How important is rupee payment for cushioning our import bill of oil?
It would certainly help if we can have a rupee trade, because you see, when you are having a rupee trade, then you are having one essential risk is the price of oil. But when you are having dollar trade, you are in a double jeopardy that if the rupee depreciates vis-a-vis the dollar, then you are in a greater trouble. At the moment, we are having slight disruptions on both fronts. So I think it is the right time to ask them to see, look here, if we can either, why not have a special price for developing countries, because it's globally agreed that we all want to raise the living standards of people living in the developing countries. And if these oil-rich companies can also see the point that yes, we have a global responsibility. We have a global responsibility now, an acknowledged one, for reducing emissions globally. There is also a sustainable development goal of making large sections of our population across the globe accessible to cleaner, modern means of livelihood, better livelihood. So I think, I only hope that our petroleum-rich friends see the point and share this global responsibility and heed to the call of the Prime Minister. It's one side that those companies are expressing an interest to come and invest in our refineries. But that also ensures their demand, because that refinery will ask for fuel. So they are ensuring their own supply chain also. Let us be very clear about it. So I think we will be calling upon them to exercise, I think, a far greater social and global responsibility in helping countries like India, which are in a very crucial developing phase. We are going through the highest economic growth rate across the world. And in the energy demand in the future also, India and China are the two countries which will take up a very substantial share of the energy demand growth.
Right.
So it's in the interest of the oil producing countries to ensure that our countries become healthy. We are not going to become oil rich suddenly. Yes, the fields that we are asking to be explored, as Mr. Pasrija has explained, they will take a little time. That will help us push maybe 5%, 10%, 15% in the coming times. But overall, if the health of the economy is good, say countries like Japan, Korea, which are importing a much greater percentage of oil, but the countries are in a healthy economy and they don't have so much social responsibility as we have. So I think the appeal has to be to these countries that just as in the environment plan, we have a global responsibility, also for economic uplift, we have a global responsibility.
Mr. Pasrija, Prime Minister also calls for private participation. Now, how important is that for the oil and gas sector?
Now, these which have been offered also, this also is the private participation which has come. In a certain area, they said public sector not to bid, and ultimately private sector came forward as an operator, So this is one area which is there, But in addition to that, very important is, these overseas companies, we'll have to encourage them also to get into India. So this is one area which also there is a focus, has to be a focus also, so that our investment which is required could also inflow could come from them also, which will, reduce your foreign exchange requirement to that extent. So this is essentially needed,
Sir, how important is technological cooperation from oil-producing countries to find viable exploration alternatives?
You see, I would first dwell a little more on what Mr. Pasrija has mentioned, that inviting foreign participation, you see the financial support which is coming from these investors. This is a primary requirement.
Right.
Secondly, when they come, the majors, they are some of the best oil producing companies in the world. They would be bringing with them the best available technologies. Not that our companies are using a much inferior technology, but absolute cutting edge technologies would be brought in by these companies, hopefully on the exploration front. Just as on the refineries, again, we need to have refineries which have the highest GRMs. the gross refining margins. So it is there, you see, we've got to make every business profitable and compete with the best in the world. We can't afford to be running inefficient exploration because time moves fast. The country cannot wait more than is necessary. I'll put it that way. Too long, yes, there's a certain necessary gestation period in going through. We have some reserves of shale, but it is yet to be proved if we can really exploit them at commercially viable prices to go. Yes, if oil prices push up further, we have to look for alternative substitutes also, like the ethanol substitution, methanol we're working on. Wherever you see in northeast part of our country, we've started experimenting with methanol as a cooking fuel. So it's all over. It's not only automobiles. Today you want cleaner kitchens.
Right.
We move people on to gas. So the dependence in a way on the oil and gas is increasing, but the other side is that we are also developing parallel alternatives. Is that electricity has reached every village now in the country, every census village.
Absolutely.
Hopefully it should reach homes. So they may have an option if we can produce cheaper electricity to switch to electricity. Secondly, moving away from fossil fuels. We are in an era now where the renewable energy sources are getting cheaper and affordable. But what is important there is that we do not import large quantities of this equipment, as we're importing about 80 to 85%. We should be producing these so that dovetail it with the Make in India program. So you gain in more ways than one, not only in environment pollution control, but also in creating jobs and opportunities for the youth of our country.
You also mentioned about US sanctions on Iran. Now, what would be the impact on the oil prices once these sanctions become operative from November 4th?
Well, it is certainly going to be a little tense period, but hopefully diplomacy, and I think appealing to better sense that there are countries which are passing through a very critical phase, and their rejuvenation process, or I would say a growth process, should not be disrupted in an undue way. And I'm sure that the United States also, there are people who would be looking at India growing as a good democratic partner. After all, we are the largest democracy in the world. And I think the United States should take particular care of our interests, because democracy is not a very thriving instrument of governance world over. But we have proved ourselves to be a democratically run country with strong systems. So I hope good sense prevails, and we are given some exemptions from that.
Sir, last 30 seconds. What is the future path of crude oil prices?
Future path, the crude oil is now hovering around $80.
Yes.
And I expect that crude oil price may go little up and may also come little down. But with the sanctions becoming strong, it may have adverse impact. This is only one area which is there. But at the same time, Modi ji I think is taking up with also US government, so that sense prevails that we should be allowed to have some crude oil import from Iran,
Right, point well taken. Thank you so much for joining us, gentlemen.
Right.
So focus remains on reducing energy costs. Time for a short break. On the other side, RBI's data localization policy. Stay tuned to Rajya Sabha Television. Welcome back. You're watching Policy Watch. The Reserve Bank of India stuck to October 15 deadline on data localization. All system providers now have to ensure that the entire data related to payment is stored in India. The directive is part of a wider push to store data locally. And for more on this, I'm joined by Mr. Ashok Nag, former advisor at the Reserve Bank of India. He's joining us from Mumbai through Skype. And in the studios, I have Mr. Sanjeev Gupta, banking expert. Welcome to Rajya Sabha Television, both of you. Mr. Nag, how will this policy ensure unfettered access to data for the Reserve Bank of India?
Well, Reserve Bank appeared the 6th April 2018 that policies guidelines is that one thing is that the data, payment data should be stored only, the word is used is only in India. I think the motivation behind this RBI's policy is that if suppose your data is kept stored in outside India in another country, and if we somehow, for some reasons or other, have some problems with that country and access to the data is prevented by certain kind of a altercation or certain kind of a conflict with that country, then we have no access to our own payment data, which is a genuine concern. But I am not very sure the word only is very useful here. For examples, the data which is being kept in India, it required to be a kind of a disaster recovery site. It could be outside India for some reason or other. It is not necessary that if you have access to your data within the boundary of your country, it does not mean that somebody else from the other country cannot have access data. Because RBI itself, that circular which RBI has issued on 6th April, it says that foreign transactions, if it happens in outside India, must have access to this data. Okay, otherwise obviously this will not happen. So in that case, the access to data from the outside country must be there if transactions have to happen. Now, if you look at that, you are storing data in India. It does not mean that you are preventing access to this data from outside. Okay, so this policy of protecting your data, the one is that I must have data unfettered access. I should be able to monitor data, my payment system data at any point of time. It's a legitimate requirement of a regulator. It cannot be doubted. But whether only asking that to be stored data only in India, I'm not sure it's the best solution, because even technologically, I can tell you it cannot be prevented. Once you give access to the foreign transactions to the same database, I can access by many other means. And obviously that access, if it is open, if it is not a kind of a firewall which prevents any access from any IP outside India, then this data has to be given to outsiders also. So in that case, you cannot say that this data is my property. I only will give access to unless you ask permission from me. That is not going to happen. In fact, if you look at over the time, one of the major payment system data, not actual transaction data, but at least the message is run by Swift. Swift entire databases outside India. It is running for quite a number of times, and it is running quite efficiently. In this, I believe that this policy of the data localizations is a kind of a reaction today happening, which can be called digital mercantilism. See, what happens today, data is the most valuable assets. Everybody agrees with that. Google has access to the entire profile of the information either we are all using either Google, Gmail, or Yahoo, or some other the mail service providers, and most of them data is outside India, and they have an entire profile of entire country of most of the people who are actually online. So this kind of a whether your technological abilities there, that you should not allow cross-border data flow without your consent. I think technologically it is not possible, it is not feasible, it will not happen. But
Mr. Gupta, would you respond to his concerns?
Mr. Nag, very well said. I think you started it very well. So I think two things. We'll have to see what RBI wants actually. RBI wants three things. Let's start from there. RBI is concerned about the safety, security, and monitoring of this data. And I think these are the three basic tenets on which this entire thing has come out. Let's go also a step back and see why this policy at this point of time. In the first bi-monthly review that RBI did on closing on 5th of April, they realized that there is a very large upsurge in the payment ecosystem, which is impacting the country. And what is this large upsurge? We have the data today now to say this very clearly. It's a 20% upsurge between the last August and this August. So between 2017 to 2018, the 110 or rather 1100 trillion rupees worth of the transactions have grown to 1300 trillion rupees. So this 20% upsurge is clearly indicative of the time of the things to come. So what is important for RBI besides the safety and security of the data, which Mr. Nag has very rightly spoken about also, is that there is an unfettered supervisory access which RBI needs on this data. I think Mr. Nag is stressing on the only word. What I think is the intent which RBI says is the storage has to be only in India. Till now, we realize that the storage has not been in India, and that's what is being trying to be addressed. With this storage coming only to India, that's all the objective is. You can have what the foreign companies are offering as of now to RBI is that let's have a mirror image of the data here, which is not acceptable. Three key issues RBI has on that. One, we must have supervisory access. That's it, completely. That's a supervisory role which RBI has. Second, which is I think equally important, is that its right of this access cannot be denied by anyone. Suppose the data is stored in US and US imposes some kind of, for example, regulatory impositions on us, and we are not able to access that data, or in some other country. For some reason they were to turn hostile to us. How would RBI be able to access that? And third, which is I think equally important, is that the Indian citizens' data must remain within the confines of India. You can do whatever else, and they've clearly specified that whatever is the foreign leg of the data, that can be stored outside, we do not mind. And let's see the supervisory role also for a moment. Again, three important issues here. One, prevention of any kind of money laundering. That supervisory role which RBI has on the monitoring side is very, very paramount. It cannot allow it has to prevent the money laundering. Second, it also has to make sure that the entire, the actual owner of the funds must be clearly allocatable. And third, which is not in any way less, is that they should not allow any kind of round tripping or layering of the financial transactions. I think these are the key issues there. So I think that's why and how it will prevent is by making sure that the entire system provider, along with the service providers, the intermediaries, all the other persons who are part of this payment ecosystem must store all the data related to whether it is collection, collation, processing, and the end-to-end instructions must all remain within the confines of India. And that's, I think, RBI's style.
Coming to you, Mr. Nag, what does this policy mean for the people of India, for us, for businesses, and particularly for the startups?
See, the policy as such by itself does not have any impact on the consumers who are using the payment system. Only thing it may happen, see, ultimately, whenever you are accessing a digital payment system, somehow or other you are making some payment to the service providers. Okay, suppose you are swiping a credit card, obviously merchant has to pay certain kind of a fees, and these fees are somehow or other passed on to the consumer in some other way. Point is that two things are available here. One, if suppose we are, I agree with that RBI's concerns about the anti-money laundering, concerned about the access to the monitoring surveillance, absolutely no doubt about that. RBI must have unfettered access to the payment data of its own citizens, or who are part of our Indian rupees monetary payment system. My point is that if suppose I have my own country's data here, I'm making only, if that increases the cost substantially, somehow or other our consumers have to pay for that. That payment, how much will be incidence, we do not know, but maybe it has to be left with us if we are concerned about the national interest in the preserving the data within the country well. My point is that this kind of a localizations of all the informations about transactional informations and within each country, it is possible. See, for example, China is doing this thing, same thing. And obviously, but the many other countries, okay, there are very strong kind of a data protection rules are there. If you look at the rules which have been 2011, I think IT Act, which are there, they are saying that if the country which is, suppose we have a data storage system, has a similar kind of a more stringent kind of a data protection rules are there. Well, like say GDPR rules which have been, EU has now come into being, these are very, very strong stringent rules. We have now ISI 27001, a standard system for protections of the privacy of the data. Now, in a network world, my point is only this: in a network world, even if your intention is that my data will not flow out of my border without my permission, it is not going to physically possible, technologically feasible. I can always breach the wall. There
Mr.
is no
Nag,
doubt
you've
about
mentioned
it.
this point, and Mr. Gupta, tell me, even the foreign companies have said that this policy would create trade barriers and have pitched for free flow of information. Do you find those arguments legit?
There is actually a great pressure which has been created or mounted on the Indian government and especially RBI on this account. And I agree with you that two of the senators have gone on record to write this, that it is going to be a barrier to the free flow of trade.
Yes.
They've touted three more things alongside, and I would like to recount it for the benefit of all your viewers. One, they are trying to say is that data is something which is free flow. Well, let me say data as, and I really thank Mr. Nag for agreeing with the views. And as he rightly said, data is actually today the new gold or the new oil. And it's actually something which is being played upon, the artificial intelligence, the entire machine systems, everything works on the data only. And data has become the most possessive new element on the globe today. So these people feel that the data is supposed to be free flow and allowed to be freely flowing across the barriers, dimensions, borders, countries for all practical purposes. They want two more things. One, they want that they should be allowed to only keep mirror images in India of the data which they would host outside India. And third, they want is in any case a little more time to consider. Well, I must tell all these people that 60 companies have already lined up and confirmed compliance of the regulation which RBI has already proposed on 6th April 2018. The world majors, including Google Pay, has confirmed that they will rally and they just need a time. WhatsApp, in any case, has confirmed.
Yes.
So I think the majors that are left out, let's recount them here for a moment, which is what could be the rest of the lobbying element, which is Amex, the Visa, the Master, the PayPal, and the Google Pay and the likes of the world. I mean, so that's fair. So I really don't know what kind of lobby is this, that India, which is touted to have one of the finest software professionals, they will not be able to store it as well, or the cost will go up. I do not agree with the cost element. Cost can only be a one-time investment. To operate in this country, if the country wants to have the data directly under its control, they will have to comply with it. And I think that's very fair.
But despite that lobbying, the RBI stuck to its stance.
Which is
on that
what I
note, thank you so
congratulate
much,
RBI
gentlemen, for joining us. And with that, it's a wrap on this edition. Thanks for watching and stay tuned to Rajya Sabha Television.